Good evening. It is 7 o'clock. I call the meeting to order and pass the chair to Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you. Good evening. First up, we have a delegation from the Fort Smith District Education Authority. Ms. Aubrey.
Good evening, everyone. So I think everyone knows me here, but my name is Laura Aubrey, and I'm one of your representatives or appointed members to the District Education Authority, along with Ann Pissinger here. And we also have Rebecca Cabell, who wasn't able to be here tonight. So I had requested to delegate to council for one primary reason in bringing forth a traffic plan consideration for the school zone at JBT. But as we haven't been here for a while, I also thought it was important to provide an update on things that have been going on with the DEA in the last year. So to start off with that update, first is, as you know, COVID-19 has played a very significant role within the schools. And we've been sort of working hard to ensure that we're able to deliver programming within those guidelines. And that played a really big role within our administration over the summer, as most of them had to work through the summer. Lots of challenges with our department on many fronts. Some of them, I believe that we wrote a letter that you were copied on in the spring, where we had to have, well, it was in the spring. Yeah, so we think we copied the town of Fort Smith on a letter where we asked the minister to do an accommodation of the calendar. We had submitted our calendar in March, and the minister came back and basically wanted us to change the calendar. So there was a bit of back and forth. Our relationship with the department hasn't been wonderful. And we've also had to band with the Huron River District Education Authority as well, and a number of times to push back different agendas. So that's been very challenging for us. When the ledge came down and met in Fort Smith, and I believe all of you had a meeting with the ministers, we also, Anne and I, had put in a request to meet with Minister R.J. Simpson about a variety of issues, one of them being funding. So federal funding was supposed to go to the territories and allocated within the different regions. And we got some of that funding and didn't get all of the funding, but that has been resolved as well based on some other things. So it's been an up and down period, but that's been a lot of our focus over the last 6 months has definitely been COVID. So moving on to why I requested to come here, and that was traffic. So as you know, how we vision traffic in a school zone is a square, right? You have Bennett Hall, and you have the high school, and you have JBT, and you have Field, and kind of a square coming in. Traffic has been an issue in front of JBT for quite a long time, even with bylaw officers. It's still not resolved. A lot of people speed in that area. And when your bylaw officer isn't stationed there during key times, people tend to go through those areas, and we still have a lot of misses. Because of COVID right now, JBT is unable to do their pedestrian walking program where they have students walk through the parking lot to the school during critical times. And so the administration has a lot of concerns around the safety of children. So what we're proposing from the District Education Authority is to create a 3-way stop sign entering the square school zone. So right now there's a 4-way stop sign on Calder, both at Conybeare and Field. But we would like to ask that the town of Fort Smith put in a 3-way stop sign at McDougall coming off of Conybeare and also Field. So what would happen is that you would slow down traffic coming into the school zones, and that would help mitigate the traffic issues that we've had. That's it. Short and sweet. And is there anything that I'm missing? No.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, comments, questions? Councillor Cox?
So just to clarify, you're requesting 2 3-way stops,
That's correct.
one at the McDougall and Conybeare,
Mhm.
and the second at McDougall and Field.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think that would go a long way right now. From the 4-way, there are no stop signs all the way to the airport. So what we're seeing is that there's that speed, right, is just naturally tends to happen because there's no mitigating factors. I know it's very common, a lot of school zones, in other jurisdictions. When I lived in Yellowknife as well, there's a lot of 3-way stops that help, right, slow down traffic. And I believe that this would play a big role within slowing down traffic into the school zone.
Thank you. Supplemental, Councillor Cox?
Aside from the stop sign request, do you see are there any other traffic changes that the town could consider to help with traffic in that area from a school perspective?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure I know if you're looking at a more comprehensive traffic plan area for that, for the school zone specifically, there might be other mitigating factors. I'm not sure. I think from our perspective, starting with 3-way stops coming into the school zones would go a long way, and more signage, right? I understand that putting, I'm not sure what they're called, but the speed bumps are challenging with snow removal. So I think this is another way around it, right? Putting in the stop signs kind of gives you an avenue to deal with traffic in a different way.
Thank you. Further comments, questions from council? Councilor MacArthur?
Excuse me. I would gladly be in favor of that idea. 2 3-way stops on those 2 streets.
Mhm.
You try to get out of the school on a Friday because they get out at lunchtime in a school bus. I'm sitting at it doesn't matter which way I go, this left or right.
Mhm.
I'm sitting at the 4-way for 5-10 minutes because I'm about the 20th vehicle in line. It doesn't matter which way I pick. I'll pick this way one day and it'll be 10 minutes before I get out in the road. So I think the 3-way stop will help a little bit. The 4-way down at the other end by college, it's just as slow too. I think maybe if think about maybe widen the roads at the 4-way and have a turning lanes, that might speed it up a bit too, but then you're cutting into people's yards. So I don't know, but
Mhm.
that's a start, having the 3-ways anyway.
For sure. And I think crosswalks too, then you're putting in some crosswalks at the same time, because I don't believe there are, well, maybe there are. Maybe not. I think in one area that there could be, but I would recommend also putting in some crosswalks at the same time.
Supplemental, Councilor MacArthur? Further comments, questions? No? Okay.
right,
Sorry. Councilor usually has a lot more questions than that, or comments. Thank you very much.
Okay. I look forward to hearing what the outcome of the request is. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on. We have, are there any declarations of financial interest? Seeing none, can I get a motion to, a recommendation to adopt the agenda as presented, please? Councillor Couvret?
Thank you. I move that the agenda be adopted as presented.
Thank you. Second to the motions, Councillor Cox. Sorry, Mayor. I didn't know if that was a discussion on the agenda. Mr. Morrison?
Thank you. I would like to add 2 items. Firstly, item number 9D, appointment of a deputy mayor. Further, item 9E, moving in camera for a personnel issue as per Cities, Towns, and Villages 23.3C.
Councillor Couvret, are you amenable to the additions? Cox, yes. So further discussion on the agenda as amended? Seeing none, can I get a show of hands in favor? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. The minutes of our last meeting on October 6th are in the package. Unless anyone has anything to bring forward from the minutes. Looking right at you, Councillor Couvret. Well, we'll move on quickly. Visions, values, and the strategic plan, which remain in your package for a while. Councillor Cox?
With the strategic plan, just looking for an update on the slope stabilization project, where that is at.
Mr. Morrison, are you prepared to provide an update right now?
Certainly. With the slope stabilization project, we did receive some preliminary design. It is a design project that's grade all slopes within municipal boundaries to an angle that is less susceptible to movement. And initial findings, well, to step back, it would be an exercise of cut and fill to take a steep slope that's undulating. In some areas, you have to cut material. Other places, you have to fill in material. Initial findings were that there was a great deal more fill than there was cut. We were kind of hoping it would sort of balance out, so anything that got cut could become fill, if that makes sense. So it's looking like there's going to be a lot of fill required, and so we're working with a consultant to narrow the vision to more high-risk areas within the community. Part of that exercise required the consultant to come to the community. So they were supposed to come last fall. They wanted to actually be able to witness the bank and groundwater in the bank, which means prior to freeze up. They missed freeze up last fall, and then they weren't able to come all year due to COVID. They finally were actually able to get a consultant in who was working on another project in Yellowknife through the community about 2 weeks ago. And so they've done a bunch of on-site investigation, and we hope to get an update shortly once they've had a chance to process that.
Thank you. Supplemental, Councillor Cox? Anything further on the strategic plan? Okay, we'll move on to governance. Council priorities, Bylaw Review Committee. Sorry, Councillor Couvret.
Okay. As everybody's aware, the minutes of our meeting of October 22nd are in the package. Just some of the, this was the first meeting in some time. Bylaw Review Committee had not met in some time due to COVID-19. The obvious excuse that everybody's using, including Mac and everybody else. So well, we jumped on the bandwagon. But some of the items that we discussed during the meeting was moving forward the council priorities bylaw and the council procedures bylaw as well. There's a need was identified to move forward with the appointment of a council honorary review board for to meet the current conditions under the new council honorary bylaw. So that is in motion. There was also some discussion around the bringing forward motions unannounced at meetings, and there is some pushback saying that if we were to ban the practice of bringing motions forward at meetings, that we're actually infringing upon democratic rights of people to be able to move items forward. So it's an item that needs to be discussed in further detail by the review committee, and hopefully some additional commentary from other councillors regarding it. Suggestion is that motions be brought forward at the standing committees to allow proper discussion and for council to be able to make a informed decision based on an open discussion prior to actually voting on it during the same meeting. Administration also noted that under the audit, we're required to put in place a capital assets evaluation bylaw. So that is something else that we need to work on. As well, the water and sewer bylaw is a project in progress, and hopefully we'll be moving forward on that shortly. The rest of the stuff is covered in the minutes, and if anybody has any questions, be more than pleased to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Couvret. Any discussion, questions, comments? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, move on to the Communications Committee. Councillor Cox.
Again, with the Communications Committee, we talked about topics for the November newsletter, so those are outlined in the minutes. We also, I also provided an update on our social media presence, which is growing slowly but surely. Please, if you see posts on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, please like and share them if you are able. And we talked at length, I guess, towards the end of the meeting about other ways of, excuse me, I'm going to remove my mask. Other ways to have councillors engage in council communication. And one of the suggestions from Deputy Mayor Smith actually was that we do short videos. So each councillor could do a short 30-second video on an issue that is that they are passionate about in the community, and then we can post and share it on our social media channels. This is a way of informing residents about issues that are happening in the community that the town is actively working on. For example, the renovation work at the rec center, the street lighting project. And so those were examples of items that could be, that councillors could do quick selfie videos on. So over the next couple of weeks, if you could please think about what you would like to do such a video on, and then we can discuss the best means of filming and then sharing. Are there any questions?
Mr. Morrison?
Thank you. Regarding the brown bag lunch, we're looking to start advertising, but we're not certain if a topic was identified for this month or not, and whether council even wishes to consider the efficacy of that mechanism of communicating with the public. My understanding, there was one member of the public at the October meeting, and then there were 2 members of the public at the September meeting. I can't recall August, but it was fewer than the fingers on my hand, I think.
Yes, fair comment from administration. There is will from council to continue, certainly from the communications committee, to continue with the brown bag lunch, at least for the rest of the year. And to answer your question directly, no, there was not a specific topic selected for the November brown bag lunch.
Councillor Couvret?
Well, for a suggestion for a topic, and one of the areas that I've identified several times as key to our community is post-secondary education.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Couvret. Councillor MacArthur, did you have a comment?
In regards to the rec center renovations, is there a chance maybe some counselors, if we can go and see what's happening on the renovations and see how things are going?
Thanks, Councillor MacArthur. Slightly off topic, I guess, but I don't know, Mr. Morrison, if you have any thoughts about that?
Certainly. I mean, right now the work has been limited to the basement, some demolitions and pouring of slabs, and sort of the work they can do until designs are finalized. And I'll speak to the status of the designs. I presume I'll be asked to speak to the status of the design work under item 5A. What is that? A V? 5A5? Or no, 5A6. So I'll talk to the status of the design work. If you want to see the actual kind of nail and hammer work, it's just a matter of touring you through the basement of the rec center. That's a construction zone. I'd have to ask the contractor's permission for tourists, but I don't see why they'd say no. They tend to be very proud of their work.
Are there comments or questions relevant to Communications Committee? Well, that's definitely a good question, Councillor MacArthur. Okay, well, thank you. So moving on, Post-Secondary Education Committee. Nice segue, Councillor Couvret. Mayor Napier, do you want to provide an update? Sorry, we're just about to do an update on the Post-Secondary Education Committee. The minutes are in your package from the October 14th meeting.
Thank you. My apologies. My electronic version is not as easily navigated. We did forward our letter to the education minister, our feedback in regards to the first and second discussion papers. We also did meet with the joint leadership, both the chiefs locally and the president of the Métis Local. It is one of the discussion items of which we would like to speak with the Premier and the Minister. There was a new paper that has come out, but that was after our Education Committee meeting. And that is everything that I have right now.
Thank you. Further comments, questions on Post-Secondary Education Committee? I think there's a few discussions within the committee meeting about some next steps forward, including potential speaker series and further campaigns. Sorry, Mayor.
That's right. And we do have our next meeting is tomorrow.
Councillor Couvret?
Yeah, I guess just so that I'll be mentioning this tomorrow at the meeting is the college recently, or the department recently, release the strategic plan timelines for the foreseeable future for the transformation of Aurora College and the eventual instatement of the Polytech. And just to be on public record, I'm totally dismayed that the minister is not prepared to consider appointing a independent overview board of directors prior to 2022. In their document, they're suggesting September 2022. And I know in committee, we've talked about it being happening sometime early 2021. And I think we really, if this is supposed to be a college that's independent of being built towards being independent arm's length institute from ECE, those people need to be involved now during when you're putting in foundations, or else you're trying to tell people build, well, we built you a faulty foundation, deal with it. And it's going to be significant issues down the road as the college tries to transform into a university without a independent board being appointed as soon as possible to oversee that. Basically, like I've noted in a few emails, it's just a cohort of 10 bureaucrats in Yellowknife pulling together their plans for a university in Yellowknife, for Yellowknife, and hopefully be able to attract destination, become a destination university. And that's not what we need right now. We need a university in the north for the north.
Thank you, Councillor Couvret. Further comments, discussion on post-secondary education committee? Mayor, Napier, Worship.
Thank you. And just to follow up on Councillor Couvret's earlier comment, the idea to have the topic of the brown bag lunch with council cover post-secondary education was discussed during our committee meeting. And I think that's definitely an item that we need to bring back to the public, and not just in our community, but to other communities as well.
Okay, if there's nothing further on that, fourth council priority is fire abatement, which from what I understand or what I see around the community is, very actively happening. Mr. Morse, do you have an update on fire abatement for us?
Thank you very much. As you know, the town has awarded 2 contracts, 2 fire abatement contracts, one in West Grove and one in around Tamarack. I haven't seen status of work. I know notifications have gone to residents in the Tamarack area to remove any belongings off of town land so that we can treat it. I know that firewood removal, the approach being taken in the West Grove area is removal of firewood first and then treatment of the land after that. I know that is happening. I think that, typically this sort of work happens in the late fall or winter when the ground is stiffened up. I don't know if any of you have been backcountry recently, but with the early snow, it fell on liquid water and the ice just isn't forming up. It's just forming slush. So movement through the backcountry is actually quite difficult. So that might slow progress. However, as council is aware, you approved $150,000 for fire abatement in the capital budget. The 2 projects that came in less than expected, and as such, the town has approximately $50,000 left. The regional department of ENR has always been a good partner with the town of Fort Smith. As you know, when they had untasked fire crews, they sent them to Axandall Hill to process wood, and that's been being taken by residents this fall, actually. And they've recently come to us. I did advise council with $50,000 of money as well, and we said that's great. We'll put it together. We'll have $100,000. We can do a whole lot of extra fire abatement work. The town has treated all municipal lands such that it's now really, we're just in a maintenance role with our municipal lands. So we said to ENR, let's go out and treat some commissioners' lands, because as I've advised council before, we've been having difficulties getting the commissioner to the table to have them properly steward their lands within municipal boundaries. So we said to ENR, we have the money, you have the money. the ENR money. It's found money. Let's use it to treat some commissioners' lands. And the plan was made to extend the fire break. There's currently a fire break that runs along the Alberta border, and it terminates just by the college HEO training area across from Trout Street on the highway. And the intent is to extend that fire break out to the highway so that we could have complete fire protection around the town. ENR approached Department of Lands and was told it would be a minimum of 8 months until they had permission to do any work. That doesn't work for a number of reasons. First reason is this is fiscal year money. So 6 months from now, when the approvals would finally be in place, the money would be gone. Second of all, 6 months from now, we've lost season. And third of all, we want to build a fire break. We don't want to have ownership and responsibilities for these properties, which is the only way it appears lands can allow the fire break, unless, of course, it's an emergency. If there was fire bearing down on the town and we were being reactive, we would be able to push the fire break in, no problem. But we are trying to be proactive and do preventative work, and we are getting stopped and told that the only way you can do this work is if you have a reserve on the land, take out a lease, and become the steward of that land. And so for that reason, contrary to what I think council was told by the minister, we are not necessarily seeing the cooperation required to do fire abatement and fire protection work for our community. We have the funds, we have the will, we have the government partners. We do not have access to the lands to do the work. So that's sort of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back battle of fire abatement in the community currently.
Thank you for that disappointing update. Considering it's the same minister, you would think that there could be a fairly simple resolution to this. And we all know how quick they are to give us leases. Yours. Sorry, Mayor Napier.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. Unfortunately, we did not have the information regarding the fire break in advance of the meeting with Minister Thompson. So this is something that I am still following up on.
The issue would be consultation around commissioners' lands for permitting. Is that the reason for the delay?
I can't speak. It wasn't the town that approached the Department of Lands. It was ENR. I presume that they want to use all the standard processes they would use through the issuance of a lease, which is consultation and these sorts of things. However, my understanding is that the land was previously reserved by the GNWT because it is adjacent to the HEO training area. So, and again, I'm speaking sort of third-hand knowledge. I think for some reason, the college did not renew its reserve on the properties. And so while it is still used by the college, the property is no longer considered reserved, which would re-trigger the process of consultation. I'm not sure of the ins and outs of it. I'm just aware of the impediments.
Thank you. I wonder if a joint letter from community leadership, all levels of community government, could satisfy that kind of consultation requirement or expedite it. You have one arm of the GNWT trying to do right, trying to actually manage commissioners' lands in the community, which is something the municipality has been asking for years. You have a funding commitment to be stonewalled by another department. Seems, I'm not sure what the word is that I could state publicly, but it's nonsensical. Mayor Napier?
Thank you. In the last discussions that I had with Minister Thompson, where we were talking about consultation, unfortunately, it's not just our community leadership that needs to be consulted. However, this is not development. It is protection of our community, and I don't think that we should have these barriers in fire saving and protecting our community members. So again, I will be bringing this back to the minister and to the departments.
Thank you. Okay, anything further on fire abatement? Okay, seeing none, we have chosen to keep the daycare under governance council priorities for regular updates. Mr. Morrison, is there anything to bid council on the childcare center?
Thank you. I will be able to provide more detail on sort of the in-depth operations next week when the director is here, but we have modified operations to allow half-day enrollments for those involved in childcare activities, junior kindergarten, those sorts of things in the morning. They can enroll in the afternoons now and vice versa. We're still not up to full enrollment. Approximately 4 to 5 children at any given time. Again, there's still a lot of parents that are at home. So we're hoping that as the COVID situation evolves, that we will see the increased enrollment based on the needs we were advised of. Other than that, it is a new program. It is a new program we rushed out quickly in order to meet during the pandemic, to provide as many childcare options out there during the emergency times for essential workers as possible. And as such, we are still continuing to evolve the programs provided for the attendees. And they only get better and better as they grow. But at this point, we're still building the programs there.
Thank you. Comments or questions from council? Seeing none, we're staying with you, Ms. Morrison, staying in the same building, Community Restoration Center.
Thank you very much. So based on, I think I advised council of this last week, we got the first round of drawings back from the consultant based on the input that they heard when they were in the community, meeting with the public, meeting with the users, meeting with the facility users, staff, administration. We got the first round of drawings back approximately 2 weeks ago. We did an internal review of them to make sure that operationally they worked. They went back to the consultant for modifications, and I just got the updated drawings back today, so they'll get the second round of review. Again, these are more efficiency operational reviews. I'm confident that the input, what the drawings represent, still meet all the requests and feedback received from the public. The input we provided administratively was just more functionality type input. So once we've had a chance to review the second round of drawings, the next step will be to council, to the public, see if there's anything included into the drawings that come at additional cost and the pricing of those additional costs. As I stated earlier, the first phase of work is in the basement, so we will be expediting the basement designs initially to try and get those done and approved so the contractor can do that work while we can still be finalizing second floor library designs and the main floor designs. Fortunately, the basement designs are most likely the least complicated or have the fewest variables in them. And so that makes them the simplest to review. And we have been working with the specific user group of Pete's Gym, going through the equipment selection process. And so just to step back quickly, the design process, you start with what's called schematic design, and that's just kind of laying out your floors, right? Showing where your walls are, where your doors are, where your windows are, trying to figure out how people will move through and use your space, make sure your spaces are appropriately sized. Then you move into design development, which is you start figuring out, okay, what kind of finishes am I going to have on my floor, on my walls, on my ceiling? What kind of lighting am I going to have? Where are the plugs going to be? Because the plugs have to be where the TV sets are going to go, or where the treadmills are going to sit. We start looking at things what we call millwork. Millwork is sort of a built-in furniture, things like shelves or benches built into the wall, that sort of thing, as opposed to what we call FF&E, or furniture fittings and equipment. These are things that are mobile, right? They're the things that we buy. So when you move into a house, you bring your own furniture, but the counters in the kitchen would be considered millwork because they're built in. right? So we start figuring out our millwork designs and our millwork needs versus what we're going to be bringing ourselves as furniture. And so that's design development. At which point the consultant starts doing more of the detail work, what kind of 2x4s and how long they're going to be, and structural stuff. And our review input into that is less significant, right? Because we're reviewing as a user. And so we're looking at functionality of the space. We will have review of the final drawings, but more from a maintenance point of view. We'll get our maintainers involved in that level of review. So we're just finishing the schematic design review, the layout of the floors. And specifically with the basement, we're moving immediately into the design development stuff to expedite that, to figure out where the plugs are. So we've been working with users to determine what their expectations are of the new gym. So then once we've established that, we look at what we have for existing equipment, and we start working up a purchase of what additional equipment we have to purchase. Right now, we're looking at approximately $50,000 in new exercise equipment for that space. And then we're working with fitness specific companies that are giving us layouts of how that equipment will lay out in the space and provide us renderings. And we'll take that and that'll translate. If all the treadmills are going into one corner, we'll make sure we'll have the outlets and the receptacles for the treadmills there, that we'll have the connections for the TVs for the people on the treadmills to watch in that area. And so we're going to start working on that sort of stuff right away so that we can get right into building it. So that's sort of the status. If you're looking at timelines, it'll be, I've been hoping to get drawings for review to council with pricing, because any additional costs that might be part of the design would be for council approval. I was hoping to get them into the November cycle, but at the rate we're getting the information back from the consultant and the need to go public with it as well, probably not until the December cycle. So it might be something that council is engaging with residents with in the lead up to Christmas.
Mr. Morrison, comments, questions? Very thorough update. And Napier?
Thank you. The third Wednesday in December, that's our third brown bag lunch. Is that too late for a discussion topic for that meeting?
Thank you. I don't think so. I would just hate to commit to a date or a time at this point, because I don't know how quickly things will advance between now and then. I think that's a good target, but I'd hate to commit at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on Community Recreation Center? Seeing nothing. Are there any updates on Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Mr. Morrison, thank you. Any comments, questions from council? Okay, so we are moving through that's our council priorities. I have a feeling we're going to hear a fair bit from Mr. Morrison again under other business. Director's report. Opportunity for administration, Mr. Kidd.
Thank you very much. At the moment, our staff is working on reviewing the first draft of the assessment role. We're going line by line and to see if there are anything that is not correct. Also, it's less than 2 months from December 31st. So we start preparing for the year end. The vast amount of work that has to be done, transferring from 1 year to another year. Also, in addition to the year end, it goes right into preparing for the audit. I know we just received our last audit report, but we already start planning for the 2020 audit, which is going to be right after the year end. Other than that, I have nothing else. Thank you.
Very much. Any questions from council? Or any questions from council or comments on the accounts paid list, correspondence to the license report? Councilor Couvret?
not on the accounts paid list, but in regards to the director's report. I was just wondering when council could expect a update on the issue of aged and overdue accounts. I know this has been brought up much earlier in the season, and I would just like something that with the budget process about to kick off, I think some direction of or an update on that would be appropriate as well. Thank you.
Mr. Morrison, are you prepared to speak to, sounds like Councilor Gurvat wants to know who owes us money.
Certainly, too many people. So the intent was to bring the accounts receivable information as part of the property tax sale package so that council can look at the concept of debt forgiveness holistically. We're still waiting for a response from MACA since I received the legal opinion on our legal ability to forgive property tax debt. As I stated, the lawyers, our legal advice has stated that we do not have the ability to forgive property tax debt. However, that does not preclude council from still going through the motions as for the CTV for debt forgiveness. And so I've inquired to MACA to determine what would the minister do, because in the debt forgiveness process, final approvals come from the minister. So if council were to choose to ignore our legal advice and proceed with debt forgiveness regardless, I have an inquiry to Municipal and Community Affairs as to whether the minister would support that or not. That request went out approximately a month ago, and I have yet to hear back from MACA. I check back weekly, and as I'll speak to later, sometimes it seems that the urgency with respect to the GNWT only travels one way. So I still don't have a response on that, and I want to fully inform council of all their options prior to bringing that information to them.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Supplemental, Councilor Gurvat. Mayor Napier, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, thank you. My question was if there is it was distinguished whether there's a difference between forgiveness of property tax debt and the interest on property tax debt.
Sorry, Mr. Morrison.
Thank you. As per the legal opinion, as soon as any kind of penalties on property tax are accrued, they become part of the overall burden and are indistinguishable. So there's no real mechanisms for council to separate one from the other. Council has in the past, in one instance, they may recall the seniors and disabled persons issue where interest was forgiven, but that was due to difference in opinion on how the act and how the bylaw was to be applied. And so that was considered an administrative change as opposed to a forgiveness. In this case, there are no signs of any administrative error. This would purely be forgiveness. Again, there is no mechanism for partial forgiveness.
Mental, yeah. Thank you. I look forward to a very thorough discussion on that when we have MACA decides to get back to us. No further comments, questions on the director's report. Thank you very much. We don't have anything under bylaw policy review and development we haven't already spoken about under bylaw review committee. Does administration have a COVID-19 update? It's on the agenda as a.
Thank you. As you know, we have been informally drawing the EMO, the Fort Smith EMO group together since the beginning of the pandemic. As phase 2 of emerging wisely came out, there were no cases in the community, and operations at multiple levels were starting to hit their stride and figure out how to work within sort of the new parameters we were handed. We stopped meetings of the EMO. There was no an emergency anymore. It was not an emergency. It was a new way of working. As fall has come around, we have started to see some rumblings of the second wave of the coronavirus. You've seen it down south for sure, and it's showing up in the NWT in several new cases. There's been no change in direction from the chief public health officer, and as such, there's been no I have not pulled the EMO together for the town of Fort Smith. I've yet to truly see the need for it. But perhaps we're getting close. I would suggest that one more case, or I think in the case of Yukon, there was a death. I think that would probably trigger a territorial level response, changes in emerging wisely, maybe a step back, and will trigger a response from the town. But at this point, we're still observing and waiting to see that change. As I've advised previously, we continue to roll out our recreation programs. We will be starting our youth nights Friday and Saturday nights, which basically complete our return to normal operations, normal within the emerging wisely confines of a number of people. But most of our programs are back that we had been hosting prior to the pandemic. We are seeing again. I don't mean to sort of flog dead horses here. You might have seen in the news about the GNWT is going to start sampling sewage lagoons for signs of COVID, and that way they'll be able to tell if the disease in the community. They're not going to be able to, of course, follow it up the pipes to individual toilets to determine who has it, but they will know if it is in the community or not. So the municipalities are intimately involved in this process. We were advised of the process and asked if we wished to participate several months ago. At the time, we said sure. We were told that our only level of participation would be to allow MACA to install the devices in one of our lift stations and to store it until they had time. And then when the devices arrived, they started giving us all the instructions on how to install it. And we told them, we said, well, we thought you were going to do it. They said, oh, it's really simple. You just have to do this, this, and this, sample it twice a week, put the samples on the airplane, do all this work. And we said, well, we thought you were going to do it. Yeah, they said, we're really busy and we don't have any money. And that's pretty much a verbatim quote of the email I received on the issue. And here I'm thinking, the residents have received COVID funding, businesses have received COVID funding. The GNWT has established a $90 million secretariat, or I don't know how much it costs now. The number seems to change by the day. Municipalities have yet to see any COVID funding, so it seems very cynical. Tell the communities that you don't have the people or the manpower to do this work, and they expect us to do it. So we've since, after some pushback, MACA has conceded to allowing us to do the work and then bill them for it. So that is a small win. We also received a phone call from MACA asking what we were going to do to feed residents that were self-isolating. And my thought is, this was an emergency 9 months ago, but they've had 9 months to plan for the second wave, and their solution in the midst of the second wave is to ask us what our solution is. Seems again a little disingenuous. They're the ones with the $90 million secretariat. We're the ones that have yet to receive any COVID funding, and all we've seen is drastic reductions in revenues as we've closed our facilities to meet the rules. These are things they're asking of us, things we've been asking of them since February, March. N95 masks, yet to receive them. And so our ambulance department continues to ration them and only use them in calls that are specifically COVID related. And the other issue tends to be with the Department of Health and Social Services. I've received multiple reports of difficult messaging being received from the department. For example, we've had multiple staff say that when they attend the health center showing, flu-like symptoms, they're given a choice. They can go and be tested and then have to self-isolate for 14 days, or they can go home until the symptoms subside. which then becomes very difficult for us to manage because we're told to send them home, but realize they're still sending their children to school. Their spouses are still going to work. So I don't know if that is an effective means to manage potential spread of a disease in the community. It's become very difficult for our emergency services staff. My paid emergency services staff are working extra hours because all their volunteers, as soon as they show any kind of symptom whatsoever, instead of having the issue addressed by the Department of Health and Social Services, the responsibility is pushed back onto them and they sit at home and they can't respond. And so our ambulance services are short-staffed. Our fire services are short-staffed. It's putting a strain on me and my staff because in these situations, we don't ask for medical certificates. We just tell our staff to stay home until they are better. That become administration. Administration of leave becomes very difficult, and so these are struggles that there seem how the department is responding to people that show up at the facility seems to be all over the place, and I don't know if it's effective. It does certainly makes it difficult for us to run operations. And then the only other concern I would have is there is currently not a chief operating officer at the health center currently, is my understanding. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and there's an actor in place, the boiler maintainer. I've attempted to call to address these concerns that I'm seeing as, one of the larger employers in the community, and I've yet to get a response. So those are potential concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That was a very thorough COVID-19 update. Obviously, the municipality as a corporation has responsibility as an employer to manage its workforce and follow workers' compensation safety guidelines. I guess what I'm a little bit mystified here is, unless something's changed, public health is a GNWT mandate, is it not? Especially under the extended measures that we have in public health measures that we have in place. I don't understand why the municipal government would be expected to be testing sewage, for instance. It seems very clearly a GNWT mandate, and it's just lack of resources. Comments, questions? Sorry, that was Mayor Napier.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for your comments. There have been regular meetings of chiefs and mayors, SAOs, and band managers. With the GNWT, the next meeting is scheduled for this Friday at 10:30. We have been attending regularly, but the next call is with Health and Social Services, the COVID Secretariat, and MACA. So I was aware of the sewage testing. I was not aware that the responsibility of the testing was falling on the town. Nor was I informed that the GNWT was looking for the town to provide food for residents. My understanding was that people who were in isolation or in the isolation centers, the food was covered by the GNWT. However, I will be attending the meeting of the mayors and chiefs on Friday, and I would recommend that the SAO attend as well to bring forward these concerns.
Thank you. Anything further on COVID-19? Sorry, Councillor Fred.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there's been any update. I believe the last meeting we talked about the possibility of issues rising with the border to the south. Specifically related to the winter road operations through to Fort Chip and further on down to McMurray. Bit concerned when you look at the news and the level of COVID infections and transmission in Alberta is rising remarkably, and this would provide a potential of the Winter Road is a new corridor into the NWT for that. And I was just wondering if there's been anything further discussed about approaching the government on dealing with that border.
Thank you. I know it's been discussed on the mayor and chief's calls, and I know the town has had conversations as well. I don't know if there's a particular update. Mayor Napier?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Couvret, for your question. This certainly has been an item that has been brought forward during the mayors and chiefs meetings, especially with when we've been on calls with the COVID Secretariat, Health and Social Services, and MACA. I did specifically ask that when there are updates in regards to our border, any of the roads south, or any changes, that we be involved in any changes or consulted. And I will certainly bring it forward on our meeting on Friday.
Anything further or supplemental? No. Mr. Morrison, do you have anything to add to that? No. Okay, so moving on to other business. We have a briefing note, a fairly detailed briefing note in your package on your 2021 general operations and maintenance budget, among other things, including the LGANT correspondence. So should we put a time limit on you, Mr. Morrison? There's a lot to go over here.
Perhaps I can achieve that time limit by talking quickly. It's detailed and it's not detailed because, as you see, there's no budget here. It's what we're in the process. We've had to retool all our salary and wage spreadsheets to account for the addition of the child care department, as well as the administrative changes that were approved as part of the budget last year. So that work, we're basically just, I'm in the process of reviewing the good work done by Mr. Kidd. And so we hope to have for next week, next committee, have the actual document. But the tail of the tape, so to speak, for that document is expected deficit. With broad brushes, there's no new money showing up, but a lot of forced growth cost. And so under expenses, I try and let you know what to expect for forced growth. And that is about a little over $200,000 to an increase in salary and wages. If we just do a roll up of what we pay in salaries and wages, in 2020, we paid approximately $5 million in those salaries and wages. Everybody gets a step. If you're familiar with the government process, everybody's at a level and you get 6 steps. So everybody gets a step. In our chart, that's about a 2.5% increase. And then as well, there is the bargained cost of living increase. And the one bargain for 2021 is 1.75%. So yeah, those two percentages up, you throw them against $5 million and you've got an extra $213,000. That's a rough number. Some people are at step 6 and are not going to get another step. Not all the people in this salary get a bargained increase. Not all of them get steps. So that's an average number. That's an order of magnitude number, just to let council know what ballpark it's going to be in when it starts thinking about how much, what it has to do to offset that. The other part is the 2020 reorg was based on the assumption of LGAP money. That LGAP money, as per the attachment, is not being received. This is, again, a frustrating one for me. Initial inquiries about access to the program were made over 2 years ago to the superintendent and the deputy minister, to zero response. Finally, when the reorg was approved by council in December, an application was submitted to no response. And then finally, approximately 4 months ago, the mayor wrote a letter to the premier and we received a response 2 weeks ago. And apparently COVID is the fault. COVID, we don't quite know how the disease works, but apparently it has the ability to go back in time and stop people from, I guess, responding to correspondence. So that money is not there. So that's approximately $300,000 that has to be made up in the form of a funding shortfall we won't be receiving from the GNWT and the forest growth salaries issues. There are other smaller forest growth issues. Utilities may creep up a bit, but we are not expecting any increases to most of our other materials and supplies, repairs and maintenance budgets. We will live within the monies allowed by council, and realize that is, for all intents and purposes, a reduction, right? Whenever you don't increase a GL, realize that the contractors that we buy services from and the stores that we buy supplies from, they're all increasing their prices. And so we, as a result, are actually trying to do as much with less. So by not increasing these GLs to account for cost of living, we are in fact doing budget reductions. So if we go into this, assuming we have approximately $300,000 to increase on the expense side, we look at the revenue side. Now then, revenues, we don't anticipate an increase to MACA transfer funds this year, what with COVID and everybody being short of money. Of course, we never find out until after our budget is due. MACA used to put out a document called the MACA update that we'd receive in October or November, which would tell us the funding to expect for the upcoming year. We rarely receive it, and it is subject to change. And so we don't actually know how much we're getting. We operate on the assumption that we will get the same as next year. Normally that works. There have been years when MACA decides to reduce the amount of money. So we find out mid-year that we'll be getting $100,000 less, which is never easy to stomach. But all we can draw a line in the sand and make a decision based on that. So we're assuming no increased revenue from MACA. We have previously petitioned MACA to change our fiscal year to match the government fiscal year. That would require revisions to the Cities, Towns, and Villages Act. MACA has chosen not to, and instead entertain flashier changes to the CTV, like the ability to allow municipalities to fund energy retrofit projects to individuals' houses, which is basically was just a transfer of a GNWT responsibility to the municipalities and allow us to use our cash flow to pay for it instead of territorial dollars. So that was disappointing. So again, as I've told council, we have three major revenues. We have MACA transfer funding, which we anticipate will not change. We have user fees. That's what we charge for recreation center or photocopies or tax certificates, or bad user fees like fines, where we charge people for speeding and whatnot. User fees are expected to be flat or to drop due to continued pandemic. 2020 amounts were $730,000. So that gets you an idea of what percentage of our overall revenue constitutes user fees. The other big one is property tax. So here's where we're getting the double hit, is not only are we seeing no increases in revenues, but there's been minimal development in the community for the past year. So to understand how that impacts our revenue projections, realize it's an equation. Property tax revenues, i.e. how much money the town makes, we call them the property tax revenues, is equal to the mill rate times the overall assessed value of the property. So the GNWT comes in and assesses all the properties and say all the properties in town have this value. So if you have an equation that says value times mill rate equals revenue, if we increase our revenue expectations, we want to make this much more money, we have to increase something on the other side of the equation. So either we increase the mill rate, right? Assuming the value stays the same, we increase the mill rate and everybody pays a little bit more and we meet our revenue projections. Or there is development in the community and that raises the assessed value such that the mill rate doesn't have to change. So for the past few years, there's been a lot of development in the community such that we've been able to increase our revenues without having to raise the mill rate very high. Okay, so for example, if you look at the chart that's provided, That provides a roll-up of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. So for example, in 2020, we increased our revenue expectations by 4%. So if our overall property tax revenues are about $3.3 million, 4% is $130,000. So we asked for an extra $130,000 in property tax revenue, but because there was so much development in the community with the jail coming online and with the Salt River building and the trade center, a residential property with a value of $300,000 only saw their taxes increase $21. So this isn't the big hit, right? So we made all kinds of money. People's taxes didn't go up because there was a lot of development in the community. This year, we only saw approximately $1.3 million of development in the community. And the joke is that that's that one new house that's getting built out in West Grove. There's a really big house getting built out at West Grove. But really, that kind of money is only 2 or 3 houses. And as a result, that's resulted in the overall assessed value of properties only increasing by about 0.6%. What that means is there is a negligible increase in the assessed value of properties. So any revenue increase you ask for, instead of being absorbed by an increased overall value of properties, will be absorbed through an increased mill rate and be felt harder by residents than it has historically. The good news is that if you look at the chart, because of all the development we've had, property tax increases haven't hurt that hard in the past 4 years. You know, if we just look at residential developed $300,000 house, 5% increase in 2017 only resulted in a $123 increase in their taxes. 4% increase in 2018 resulted in a $135 increase in taxes. So less development that year. So a smaller percentage increase actually resulted in a higher tax bill. But 2019, 15 bucks. 2020, 21 bucks. So these are relatively small increases in property tax. And so, you know, the other thing we have done is that not all classes of property are taxed the same way. We've taken a hard look at it, and we found that the majority of institutional properties in the community are owned by the GNWT. So we've put a larger portion of the tax burden on institutional, and you'll see that, and that's how the mill rates break down. If you look at the list of mill rates, institutional, developed, and non-developed are much higher than any of the other classes of property. And that's an effort to switch some of the burden back to a higher level of government. So to summarize, if we do property tax increases, they're going to be felt more than they have in previous years. And we're able to provide this level of analysis now is because we normally don't receive the assessment roll this soon. So we've got it before budget. We're using it to our advantage to try and inform council. So this year we have an expectation of that, approximately $300,000 or more of forced growth increases in expenses, and we're limited in how we can address that. It's you can either spend less or you can earn more. So historically, we've tried to look at earning more. So if you look at earning more, you have your 3 places you receive revenues. You can increase user fees, you can make it on property tax. You can lobby the GNWT for more money, but unfortunately, I can't budget for it. So user fees, doing the math, if we're looking at $730,000 revenue, if we do a 10% increase, that's $73,000. The thing is, council did a 10% increase last year, and we don't want to keep on going back to the same well necessarily. So have the history of the property tax increases there, and then I provide the history of the user fee increases, and so you see what we've done there. And so ultimately, the suggestion would be as we go back to property tax, and if that's the direction council wants to send me in, we will go do a further analysis of what a property tax increase would look like with our knowledge of the assessment roll, and realize the assessment roll is not fixed because it hasn't gone through the development appeal or with the Board of Revision yet, so it may change. And then just to consternate council even more, every year at budget time, there is allusions to the seniors and disabled persons property tax program. And so I thought I'd bring some detail on that program to council. How this program works is that anybody who is over the age of 65 or considered disabled gets all of their property taxes forgiven. They don't pay property tax. Half of that cost is carried by the town and half of the cost is carried by the GNWT. River runs a program similar to us where 100% of the taxes are forgiven. In Yellowknife, it is capped at $2,000. Fort Smith previously had a cap. I can't remember the value it was capped at, but probably over a decade ago, that cap was removed. So first of all, we provide a demographic analysis for you to show you what percentages of the tax-paying public are involved in this. And so you see the first chart shows in 2016, approximately 19% of the households. So 153 out of 789 households were eligible for the program. By 2020, it's increased to 172 households out of a total of 772, so 22%. So we're looking at 22% of the households. That's 2,000. And in 2020, who knows what 2021 will look like, but we've seen a great increase, and we've actually gone out and aggressively lobbied residents to apply for the program because we wanted to avoid situations which this council was at the table with us on, where people said they didn't know they were eligible. They didn't know they had to apply every year for the program. And so we wanted to avoid that. We've aggressively lobbied residents to apply if they're eligible. So we might see an increase more dramatic than what we've seen in this chart. The cost, so of these 172 households, that is a cost to the town of $188,000. The actual property taxes rebated are $376,000, but of course we get half of that back from the GNWT. So one of the interesting things about the GNWT paying half is that you get into a situation, if you start playing with that program, the amount of hurt you put on the residents is larger than the fiscal benefit we see because it's multiplied by 2. Right, you're putting double the penalty on the resident than you see as a benefit because you lose that GNWT money in the process. So the second chart gives you an analysis, a very rough analysis of what implementation of a cap would look like on this program. So status quo, nobody's impacted. $376,000 are forgiven each year. The GNWT pays $188 back to the town, so the cost to the town is always $188. If we implemented a property tax cap at $5,000, there would be 3 impacted residents. Those 3 impacted residents would have to pay an additional $57 on average a year. So their property taxes aren't much over $5,000, right? And then as you work through 4,500, now you're looking at impacting an additional resident, but the cost gets more. If you look, it's come down and you look at the Yellowknife cap of 2,000, you're going to be impacting 85 residents, okay, which is a considerable number. That's approximately half of them. And that would be an average cost to each household of an additional $900. So you would be impacting 85 households, forcing them to pay an extra $900 a year for an increase in property tax revenue of $75,000. So that's the kind of the math. So, this is something you as council have to ask. Is the benefit of impacting 75 households and costing them, an extra $1,000, is that worth the $75,000 you make in increased revenue? And some of the considerations is that seniors and disabled persons are not like people that are still in the workforce. They have fixed income. And I just recently did retirement planning, and it's actually fixed income is a gut check, right? There is no saving up and going on vacation. There's no having the resources to deal with a windstorm blowing the shingles off your roof. You get what you get. And so we have to be very careful as a council and as administration how we impact that equation, because that can be difficult to manage. $1,000 on a fixed income can be difficult. Now, one could argue that property tax is a form of means testing, and so the amount you pay in property tax should be indicative of your personal wealth. If your home is worth more, you're probably more able to manage that impact, and a cap would just address people with homes with higher value. But the other thing I would note is that if we do impact these residents such that their homes no longer become affordable, the Sustainable Development Advisory Board has done the analysis about the availability of homes. There is no place necessarily for an impacted resident to downsize to. So, these kinds of decisions and things considerations as council deliberates on this option are unquantifiable. There's no real dollar value. These are quality of life decisions. And I think that's why councils have either struggled with the decision or avoided them. And council is free to do that in this case as well. It's just, in my experience, every year this issue gets brought up. Every year someone says, what about the seniors and disabled persons tax relief program? So I thought I would bring some information to you on the program now. So that talks about revenue increases. The other things to talk about are, the other side of revenue increases are expense reductions. So I noted earlier that we're not increasing any of our other budget line items. So on average, we're actually trying to do the same amount with less because our costs of doing business have increased. This isn't the first time we've done that. We haven't raised most materials and supplies budget line items for a long time. There is no slack left in this budget, and I would suggest to council that any expense reductions will lead to some level of service reduction. So, for example, if anybody read the news, Yellowknife said 12% property tax increase. But then they said, listen, this is just the first start of the process. This is basically the same way I've presented it to council here. This is all your increased expenses. This is your one revenue mechanism, unless you want to start decreasing expenses. So they're talking about reducing travel, for example. So council may wish to look at their travel budget, et cetera. But when you get into the meat and potatoes of municipal operations, corporate services cannot really support expense reductions. We've actually just gone through exercises to try and more properly resource corporate services. Ditto municipal services, where we're constantly fighting the battle of public opinion on level of service there. So I don't suggest us defunding or reducing level of service in municipal services. However, we stand in the dubious position with community services of being in the middle of a pandemic, right? So I can reduce level of service there and not actually impact staff, because what we've done in this pandemic is, while we've not laid anybody off, we've avoided filling vacancies until the increased operations have required us to bring the people back on. So there are ways to perhaps reduce operating costs in corporate or community services that won't result in layoffs. But the way community services works is you reduce level of service by reducing access to the facility. So the discussion would be around operating hours. Council's done this in the past. When they wanted to reduce expenses, they shut the pool down on Mondays. And there was a dollar value, a savings associated with that. So if council wishes to examine level of service reductions, I recommend that they occur in community services. It'll be felt the least by residents because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it'll be felt the least by staff because we're not at full staffing right now. If council wishes to do that, I suggest you give me a dollar value. I take it back. I come back to you with recommendations on how we can use it to how we can best absorb the proposed reductions. It's difficult for me to recommend community services, right? Because these are the things we do, not because we have to, but because we feel they are right. You know, we have to do municipal services. We have to do corporate services. Municipal services or community services are there because we've decided as a community that we feel they're of value. But at this point, if this is where council wishes to go, if they feel that residents can't support what would look like about an 8% property tax increase to address a deficit, then this is where I would recommend we look. Other than that, I made a final commitment to bring a discussion to council about protective services. And so there's a blurb here about protective services. That's a long conversation unto itself. And I know that the mayor or the deputy mayor, the chair has put me on a timeline there. But what I'm struggling with this is that at the very least, I have council understanding of what we're trying to deal with and what we're struggling with when it comes to trying to appropriately do bylaw enforcement, how the landscape is changing for us, and we either have to invest or rethink what we want, what level of service we want for bylaw enforcement out there in the community. Because as long as I have residents uttering death threats to my bylaw enforcement officer, I can't in good conscience send them out there without backup. As long as we have drug dealers from high level with their guns in their cars, I can't in good conscience have the bylaw officer pulling those cars over, right? Without backup, without radio support, without more aggressive PPE and training. So I think that council needs to sort of think about what it sees as future of bylaw enforcement in this community. And truly, we're at a strange place because there's very few communities of our size deal with this. In any other place, you'd be part of a larger regional municipality, which would be able to field a team of officers, right? Because we think about it, if I want to put the bylaw officer out there, he needs backup, then I got to hire another guy. But they can't both be on call all the time, so I got to hire a third guy. Now I'm looking at a police force for a town of 2,000 people. I'm not sure if that's what we want, right? With tasers, with pepper spray, fleet of vehicles. So some of the concerns are brought there for council review. We don't have to discuss them in detail, but I'd like council to ruminate on them. Ultimately, I don't know if there's any affordability in this budget to implement any kind of change or reinvestment in the bylaw department. That would be another cost, and we're already dealing with an expense versus revenue issue. So there's the quickest I could have done it.
I think it's important to take time deliberating such matters because it really is the core business of a municipal government, and by no means meant to rush you. Just cognizant that there was a lot of detail in this particular budget. Just for some context, so I started serving on council in 2009. My first budget was 2010. I'm pretty sure, I'd have to look back in the files, but I'm pretty sure our property tax, seniors property tax expense at the time was $59,000, and it's now 188,000 as the population ages, and will continue to grow. We have some projections in the strategic marketing documents that we've seen around aging population, so this is not an issue that will necessarily go away. There has, in the terms that I've spent on council, there's been no changes to the 50-50 rate, and there was no cap, so that was probably previous to 2009 at least. Yeah, it's it really, I've said for many years that we have a real issue with revenue generation. Municipal governments we have our hands tied by our GNWT, and the funding gap is very apparent at this particular moment. Mr. Morrison, just to clarify, you're looking for direction from council on an approximate property tax increase, an approximate level of service reduction. Exactly what are you asking council for at this particular moment?
Thank you. I'm floating trial balloons to test the will of council to see if council wishes to entertain level of service decreases, to see if council is willing to entertain putting the full burden of the increased expenses on property tax, or something between the two of them. And these are, because these are basically our two options: is we lean heavily on property taxes, or we reduce the amount of money we spend. And because I don't see user fees as being an option given the recent increases, I do not see, there's no additional territorial funding coming our way. The other thing we can look to do is we did put, we budgeted for $130,000 surplus last year, which we could perhaps draw from reserves to balance the budget, take the money that we put in the bank from last year. I do not recommend drawing from reserves. I think because those reserves actually exist, we won't know until this year is audited what our actual surplus is. Further, every year should stand on its own without reserve withdrawals.
Thank you. So opening the floor to discussion, Councillor Couvret, I think you were waving away.
Yes, I was. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of thoughts. Be quite blunt, until I see the document, the budget document, I'm not really prepared to say increase taxes or level of service cuts. A couple of points I'd like to make, though, is reading through the recent Hansards. It sounds like MACA is committed to an additional or has said that they're willing to put $5 million towards the funding gap. But I believe that's over the life of this legislative assembly. So it might be pertinent for our mayor when she's having discussions with the premier to really put like we're in a budgeting process. We need to know, is government making a commitment to close the funding gap, and can you tell us how much they are going to close it by? If they can throw $90 million to create a secretariat primarily based in Yellowknife, some of that money would have more than doubled. It's more than double what the funding gap is. So if they cut it down, that secretariat, by half, they could address the whole $33 or $35 billion funding gap. So where is this government's priorities? Is it increasing the size of the bureaucracy or helping communities meet the needs of the citizens? Just in relations to the letter on the LGAP funding, I read through it actually 3 times. I didn't find anywhere in the letter that actually said, no, we are not going to give you the money. They just sort of said, here are the parameters for accessing the program, and we're not certain your application actually falls into those parameters. So it might be something administration could get back to us on. Is there options for us to revisit that actual application process? And then the final comment I have is with regards to the mill rates and institutional properties. We've been having an extreme struggle over the years trying to convince the GNWT to transfer commissioners' land to the community. And I'd be interested to know how much land in our community exists under the category institutional non-developed. And if there is a reasonable size to that, why don't we just double that mill rate? It'll bring us in a quick cash flow while they scramble to figure out how to transfer that property to the communities.
Thank you, Councillor Couvret. Further comments from council, discussion? Councillor Cox?
Just with regards to the briefing note, I agree that I would not be in support of increasing user fees to compensate for that expected $300,000 deficit for 2021, in part because we increased user fees last year for 2020, but also because I don't think that they will necessarily be a reliable source of income as the pandemic continues. So I would not support a user fee increase. I would, similar to Councillor Couvrette, I do look forward to seeing the actual budget document. I would personally entertain supporting a split between a property tax increase and a level of service cut. But I would like to see what that actually looked like in terms of what the concrete impact would be and what the numbers would look like. With the Senior Citizens and Disabled Persons Property Tax Relief Program, I wonder if, and I don't know as a first-term counselor, if a grandfather clause has ever been considered in terms of implementing a cap for residents who join the program. So it wouldn't affect, a cap wouldn't affect residents who are already applying for and benefiting from the program. I wasn't sure if that discussion had ever happened or if that's a reasonable approach. And finally, I would like to see additional monies put into the productive services budget for 2021, specifically for to support bylaw, excuse me, to support bylaw enforcement. What that looks like and how much that is, I can't say whether that's a part-time bylaw officer. I also have concerns about taking on too much of a about our bylaw department taking on too much of what I see as our CMP responsibilities. But I think it's difficult for, and we've heard that discussion at council, that it's difficult for one bylaw officer working 40 hours a week to enforce the bylaws in the community. So I see additional support in terms of additional personnel as being a way of addressing that. That is all.
Councillor Cox, Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to see hard documents on how much the town is going to be short this year. And as far as tax rate on community, we'll have to see. I don't think they would want an 8%, but we'd have to check that out. And as far as the seniors thing, I wouldn't do that because you can have 85 families mad at the town and the other, 90 not mad at the town for having to pay $400 or $500 next year. And next year I might be one of those 85 because come January 1st or 2nd when the town opens, I'll be in here with my papers.
He's a lifer. Further comments from council? Mayor Napier?
Thank you. Just as a reminder that there were funds announced by the federal government for COVID funding for municipalities for the Northwest Territories that have not yet been allocated by the GNWT. So I'm not sure how that will affect either this year's budget or next year's budget.
I read a social media post from one of the Yellowknife MLAs who said that that was being debated on and decided in the ledge later this week. but it's $2.5 million split between 33 communities and for specific purposes, of which I'm sure you could find a use for the money, but it's not going to be the offsetting the deficit as discussed here. Any Napier?
Thank you. I guess it may go into more addressing, well, some of the loss of user fees, user fee income for 2020 and potentially 2021.
It depends on what kind of strings the feds put on it and the GNWT puts on it. You know, best case is we just take it in as a revenue. And so we see reduced revenues one place, it shows up as a miscellaneous revenue elsewhere. It's not necessarily something you can budget for. We did receive $21,000 in MACA funds, and our application was based on our estimates of lost recreation revenue from in our last quarter. I think the money came through in September, and we said, well, September, October, November, December, we're going to lose this much in revenue because we can, because of COVID. And so those monies came to partially offset that. Thank you. So what I'm hearing, and this is good, this is why I did this, and I can understand counselors don't want to expose themselves to angry residents until they see the actual numbers. I'm telling you the actual numbers, right? I'm not making these up. It's not like there's some kind of magic wand that's going to wave and say that, all of a sudden the employees are making half, or the wages are going to increase by half of what I've told you. I'm telling you to expect $300,000 deficit, right? But I'm hearing very clear from council that they don't want to touch seniors, so I will not follow up on that anymore. Whether certain councilors are making the decisions for the right reason or not, angry people versus what's good for the community, we'll let them make their decisions. But there does appear to be some appetite for level of service reductions. So we will go and we'll look at that, and we'll bring information to council about various level of service reductions and what the savings will be coming out of that. And then we'll also provide a property tax analysis of actual impact on residents based on our knowledge of the assessment roll as it sits, and some various numbers. So we'll look to bring some of that. Regarding pursuing MACA funding, that's we will not get a definitive answer, at least not in a timeline that allows us to pass our budget by December 31st as we're required. Further pursuing LGAP money, given it's taken us 2 years to get a single letter from the GNWT, I don't expect any further useful information to come in the next month that we can budget to, at least. And I reread the letter 3 times too, and my biggest takeaway of it is that they said that we're allowed to ignore the contracts that they ask us to enter, which is not how we do business. So, that advice is, I guess, wasn't worth the wait. Thank you.
Anything further on preliminary budget 2021 discussion? Ms. Morrison, do you have a timeline in which you intend to bring a draft budget to council?
As I stated at the beginning of this presentation, I hope to have the budget document for next committee meeting. Level of service analysis will most likely take longer than that. Impacts on level of service. I could probably get a property tax analysis to council for the committee meeting as well, but not level of service analysis. That's more work.
Thank you. Okay, so moving ahead in the agenda, we're now looking at briefing note 2020 third quarter variance. Probably the most depressing third quarter variance I've seen.
Thank you. Well, it's very similar to the second quarter. And so what we're seeing is a lot of the initial hits we took are stabilizing. We spent a lot of money at the beginning of the pandemic to ensure continuity of essential services for residents, to because we didn't want to increase the stress of residents, and so we really kind of leaned into being a municipality while this all happened, to make sure, you know, people had all the trappings of a normal life while the world unwound around them. The biggest places we've seen hits is, well, the most noticeable is in recreation center revenue, because we did not run a recreation center. We're getting up to operation now. Still, revenues are going to be probably half of what they normally are because we're limited in the numbers. But one of the take homes from that is operating costs are also reduced, because while we didn't lay off any staff, anybody who casuals, anybody who went away from the organization, the positions were not refilled, and lots of other ancillary operating costs for heat and materials and supplies, etc., are all drastically reduced. It's I think it's in a situation like this where we realize that recreation services are not done on a cost recovery basis. The revenues we make for recreation services don't pay for recreation services, and they're heavily supported by the taxpayer. And often that's a discussion that, you know, is not necessarily comfortable to have with council, because you don't want to talk about recreation services necessarily on a fiscal basis, because there's too many unquantifiable benefits to recreation. The concept of wellness in the community, the concept we've talked about when we've talked about renovating the recreation centers, providing people a place to go, things to do, getting them out of the house, emotional well-being, physical well-being, psychological well-being, and again, they're unquantifiable. Perhaps they're quantifiable at a higher level. You know, maybe Department of Health and Social Services or Department of EC&E sees benefits from a strong recreation service because their kids are more engaged or healthier or whatever. But unfortunately, you know, they may see the benefits, they're not paying for it, right? So it's always a difficult discussion to have, the fact that recreation services are heavily subsidized, and this variance kind of draws that out for us, where we see the reduction in revenue, which is kind of offset by us spending not as much as we thought we were going to spend. So it still hurts, and I think we're going to be in the negative slightly just because we didn't lay off staff, and so we kept our rec staff, the ones that didn't quit or retire or move away. We did keep them on payroll and keep them working, because we were told by the Prime Minister to not lay them off, so we didn't, right? So going through the briefing note, little change from second quarter variance. Revenues below previous years, so there's fewer fines because, you know, our bylaw officer wasn't staring in people's car windows. Fewer lotteries because people couldn't gather. Revenue for after school care program is down because people were at home and so weren't putting their kids out into our facilities. Pool revenues are down. Recreation center revenues are down. Oddly, a lot of development happened. Development permitting is on par. Business licensing was actually up a little bit. And we're seeing a recovery of ambulance revenues. So right now, ambulance is operating well in the black. So that is good. We did a lot of work in the 2020 budget, automating all our utility calculations by doing look backs into previous years and extrapolating forward. And they seem to be quite accurate. We've seen volatility in expenses. We're paying a lot more for computer assistance as we've tried to just turn into an organization that can work remotely, and moved a lot of services onto the cloud. Again, salaries, we're still paying for that kind of the big push in the spring, so they're still up. Maintenance costs are up. In some cases, we built a lot of protective barriers and did things like that. Legal costs are up as we work to determine appropriate responses to staffing pressures. You know, this was, we had to change the way we administered staff because, you know, people were just gone for 2 weeks, and we had to find mechanisms to deal with that. That was putting pressure on staff leaves, and lots of questions came up that required legal to support to make sure we were doing things appropriately. Some salary and maintenance costs are down. as community services were operating at a reduced level of service. We weren't able to do as much training as we normally would because we couldn't send people out or we couldn't get training here. So most of our training budgets are untouched. We didn't staff the Visitor Information Center this year, so there were savings there. And so at the end of it all, it's actually quite hard to determine if we're at a net loss or a gain due to the nature of the event. Other than that, the pandemic wasn't the only strange thing that happened to us this year. We didn't have a fire season, but we had a heck of a lot of rain that pushed turbidity in the river through the roof, required the purchase of a lot more coagulants and flocculants in order to be able to treat the water through that budget, that GL, right out the window. We've seen we put a lot of energy into trying to figure out our utility revenues and our environmental revenues and flaws there. And we think we've got those figured out, and they're pulling back in line to where our expectations are. The only one is tipping fees, and we've been doing a thorough analysis of it. And right now where we're getting at is we're thinking that our current estimates are based in a blip where there was a lot of demolitions happening over a few years. We were seeing a lot of entire buildings really driving up the tipping fees we were collecting. And we based our future expectations on that, thinking that would be a trend, and it's turning out to not be a trend. So we're digging into that a little bit more and may have to revise our tipping fee expectations in the future. The other new thing that you're seeing in this third quarter document that you didn't see in the second quarter document are daycare operations. We haven't created GLs for them yet. We're in the process of doing that for this budget document. That's one of the things that's taken us a while to get it out to you. So all the revenues and expenses for daycare operations for 2020 are showing up in GLs for our after school care program. We are under enrolled. So right now expenses are outstripping revenues on that program. Then finally, I talk about the reorg that was approved when the last budget was approved. It was approved as net zero, but given the timing of how the reorganization was approved with respect to the budget, we didn't have a chance to move the monies between salary and wage ledgers. And so that's the other big change we're making for the budget we're hoping to bring to you next week.
So we're looking for a recommendation to accept the third quarter variance. We're going to entertain discussion. Councillor Couvert.
I move and recommend that the 2020 third quarter variance report be accepted as presented.
Thank you. Could I get someone to second that? Councillor MacArthur. Any discussion, questions, comments? Councillor Cox.
Just a quick question. I don't remember this from the second quarter variance report. Just on page 2 of the general operating fund, miscellaneous revenue, it's $61,000 when we expected it to be $4,500. I was just wondering what that was.
If I recall correctly, that's the payout for the loader. Yeah, so we blew an engine in the loader, which was covered by insurance, and so that's the insurance payout for that.
Mental, Councillor Cox. Further comments, discussion, third quarter variance? Seeing nothing, show in hands in favor of the recommendation. Carried unanimously. Next, we have appointment of councillor to Council Honorary and Bylaw Review Committee. I feel like we've been here before. Mr. Morrison.
Thank you. No briefing note, but council has been here before. Last time they chose to establish an ad hoc committee that would review the expressions of interest and choose committee participants. And then there is also a need to appoint the actual councillor who will be present. And that, if council wishes to discuss the terms of reference for the committee, the establishment of committees as per town bylaw is that you have to say who constitutes the committee, what its role is, whether it will be funded, and what its duration is. we don't see the need to fund this other than some lunches from public relations. The duration will be until the findings are made. Terms of reference can perhaps be a responsibility of the ad hoc committee, or it can be one of the first jobs of the honorary committee once established, is to set their own terms of reference.
And just to remind council that my understanding is the intent behind this is for recommendations which will take in effect upon the election of a new council. So you're not voting on your own honorarium increases, or perhaps you are, pending the results of an election. If there are any increases at all, it's not a given. So looking, I guess, for members of council that might potentially be interested in being the representative on a committee. Councilor Couvret? You're volunteering again. Any other councilors? Councilor Couvret?
Yeah, it would be interested to find out if Councillor Westwell has any interest, as I know he has quite a few opinions on the subject. So possibly we could solicit comments from him by email.
So the recommendation will go forth to regular meeting of council and can certainly be amended at that time. It doesn't have to stand as is. The standard process is we get a recommendation together. That means that it shows up on your agenda for a regular meeting of council. Are there any other councillors interested in maintaining this role? Seeing not exactly an overwhelming deluge of volunteers, perhaps I could ask a request that someone moves a motion, recommends a motion. Councillor Cox.
I move that Councillor Couvret be appointed to the Council Honorary and Bylaw Review Committee.
Someone, Councillor Campbell, you seconded that. Thank you. Any further discussion? Definitely have the opportunity to formalize it at regular meeting of council for November. Okay, show of hands in favor. That is carried. That is carried. Opposed? Abstentions? You're abstaining. Councillor Couvret has abstained. Motion is carried. Okay, 9D, we have the appointment of deputy mayor. Ms. Morrison?
Thank you. Current deputy mayor was appointed November 5th, 2019 for a one-year term. So it's up to council to get us a new one.
Thank you for the recommendation. Councilor MacArthur?
I'd like to move that Councillor Smith be nominated as deputy mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for the motion? Sorry, Councillor Bissinger? Feels strange to be chairing this. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, show of hands in favor. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for that. I wrote down 9E, but I can't read what I wrote. Oh, it's the encounters. Thank you. Thank you. So looking for a motion to move in camera. To discuss a personnel matter as outlined under CTV Act 23, Section 3C. Councilor Campbell? Thank you. Seconded.
Okay, Mike's on. I move that we go in camera to discuss personnel matters.
Thank you. Seconded. Councilor MacArthur. Discussion on the motion. Show of hands in favor. Carried unanimously. Thank you to town staff that get to go home early.